This old-time radio program was originally aired live, long before the advent of high fidelity. As a result, you may detect an occasional surface noise or volume drop due to transmission problems so common to old radio. We hope, however, that any variance in audio quality will not take away from your pleasure in listening to this, one of the all-time favorite shows.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
The details are not available. They will be in a few minutes. The White House is now giving out a statement. The attack apparently was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu. A Japanese attack upon Pearl Harbor naturally would mean war. Such an attack would naturally bring a counterattack, and hostilities of this kind would naturally mean that the President would ask Congress for a declaration of war. There is no doubt from the temper of Congress that such a declaration would be granted. This morning, Secretary Hull talked with the Secretaries of War and of the Navy. Now the two special Japanese envoys, Admiral Nomura and Special Envoy Kurusu, are at the State Department engaged in conference with Secretary of State Hull. Their appearance at the State Department on this Sunday afternoon emphasizes the gravity of the Far Eastern situation, where hostilities now seem to be actually opening over the whole South Pacific. Even more important than the visit of Tokyo's diplomats is this news which comes from Pearl Harbor and the news which comes from South Asia. Whatever the diplomats from Tokyo or the cabinet in Tokyo may be saying, there is a conviction in official quarters here that Japan has now cast the die. All the bits of information which came to the State Department and the Navy yesterday and today indicated that Japanese transports containing troops were steaming into the Gulf of Thailand. Japanese warships were providing a heavy escort. Having rounded the southernmost point of French Indochina, the convoy had as its only obvious destination Bangkok, the capital of Thailand. It was on the basis of this information that President Roosevelt sent to Emperor Hirohito of Japan his personal message last night, a message which appealed to the Mikado for restraint and peace. It seemed to be a final plea from the United States, and if the activities today are substantiated, it is a final plea. For if Japanese troops attempt to capture Bangkok or attack Pearl Harbor, the delicate balance which has maintained peace in South Asia is destroyed. The four powers, the United States, Britain, the Dutch East Indies, and Australia, have given Japan ample warning that invasion of Thailand would mean counteraction by the associated powers. These Japanese envoys, Nomura and Kurusu, requested the appointment with Mr. Hull today. The engagement was set for 1:45 p.m. They arrived some minutes late and in turn were kept waiting before the door to Mr. Hull's office was opened to them at 2:20. In the meantime, the President had prepared the statement which announced that Japan was attacking Pearl Harbor from the air. It is possible that the Tokyo diplomats wanted again to assure the State Department that the reports of Japanese troop movements in French Indochina were exaggerated. They did that once before on instructions from Tokyo when the President propounded his question about those movements last Tuesday. At that time, Tokyo replied that the movements were in North Indochina to offset Chinese movements on the Indochina border. The specific information of the State Department now and then was that the bulk of the Japanese troops were being moved to South Indochina, where they were in a better position to threaten Thailand. The President's plea to Emperor Hirohito was also supported by a note of warning. The warning is supported by developments and preparations in this capital. The meeting between Secretary Hull and the Secretaries of War and Navy this morning was an example of the plans that are being laid. It would be a mistake for Japan to believe that these preparations are any kind of bluff. Although officials in Washington are silent on what would be the definite consequences of a Japanese attack on Hawaii or an attack on Thailand, there are indications of what is being considered and the steps which may be taken this very afternoon. The first would be a severance of diplomatic relations with Tokyo. An immediate naval blockade in which the American Navy would take a leading part along with British units is the other probability. Both these steps could be taken by the President on his own executive authority. But an effective naval blockade, of course, could not continue long without hostilities. As a matter of fact, according to the President's announcement, those hostilities are already underway with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And just now comes the word from the President's office that a second air attack has been reported on Army and Navy bases in Manila. Thus, we have official announcements from the White House that Japanese airplanes have attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii and have now attacked Army and Navy bases in Manila. We return you now to New York and will give you later information as it comes along from the White House. Return you now to New York.
London, in many respects, has correlated its moves in the Far Eastern situation with the progress of the American-Japanese discussions in Washington. Australia and Singapore and other Crown colonies have been made ready for any eventuality, and a Far Eastern fleet has been created, headed by the 35,000-ton Prince of Wales. For a direct report on British reaction to the latest moves in the Near East and the Far East, Bob Trout is standing by in the British capital. Go ahead, London.
London heard its first news of the attacks on Hawaii and the Philippines from John Charles Daly in New York just a few moments ago. The report had not arrived in London before this Columbia program began. It is, of course, too early to give you any reaction, but as you know, the British government made plain what would happen if America became involved in war with Japan some days ago. We did get earlier that official report from Singapore that British air reconnaissance in the South China Seas had confirmed the earlier reports of Japanese activities. Japanese naval vessels, including cruisers, seen off the southern tip of Indochina, steaming toward the northwest. That announcement backed up those earlier dispatches from Washington telling of heavy Japanese troop concentrations in Indochina, both ashore and afloat. About the President's message to the Emperor of Japan, we heard nothing except the announcement that a message had been sent. Today's Libyan communique says that yesterday an important battle was joined southeast of Tobruk, where the main German tank forces have concentrated since breaking through the Tobruk corridor. These past few days, London newspapers have been full of discussions about Libya. Arguments about the caliber of guns and the thickness of tank armor, about tank speed versus tank weight, about the airplane as compared to the anti-tank gun as weapons of destruction against enemy tanks. Through these lengthy articles, there has run as the theme the conviction that Britain must counter the enemy's modern war technique with methods even more modern. Now, not all this recent discussion is adversely critical. Some think that the British armed forces have already learned a lot from hard experience in this war, but there are complaints that, for example, while British tanks in the desert lay up at night like a defensive circle of covered wagons out west, the desert darkness is lit up with the flares of the Panzer repair squads patching up damaged German tanks for the next day's battle. It is interesting that a great deal of this discussion centers on the employment of air power. In the Libyan fighting, the Royal Air Force has played a larger part than in any previous conflict. But many military writers are saying that British planes still do not play the same integral part in a tank battle that the German planes do. A typical comment is this from last night's Standard. Nobody in his senses would argue that the fleet should be without its own fleet air arm. So why do we send our soldiers out to fight without the same coordinated weapon? That is some of London's reaction to the Battle of Libya. Later, I believe, we shall hear a report on this broadcast direct from Cairo. The British are disappointed about the recent experience of Dr. Julian Huxley in the United States. Just yesterday, the latest issue of The Spectator came out with some observations about British speakers in America. It's said that Dr. Huxley is a speaker who will soon wear down any suspicion of propagandism. The British people I've met in London do not seem to think much of propaganda anyway. They think Britain's cause is good enough to stand on its own feet without any trimmings. They're more interested in the enemy's propaganda, which frequently causes amusement in London. German claims are printed in London newspapers, and the airwaves over Britain are full of German radio programs. Listeners can tune in whenever they feel like it. A listener with a powerful receiving set soon discovers that the German radio speakers have one story to broadcast to one country and another quite different story to put out someplace else. Last night, for example, the German-controlled Norwegian radio announced that the United States Army has become converted to communism, at least to the extent of installing political commissars. Now, in case you had not heard that the United States Army is now being run by political commissars, I thought I'd pass it along, for that's what Norwegians were told last night. I return you now to Columbia in New York.
To recapitulate, the White House reported today Japanese air attacks on the Hawaiian Islands and Manila in the Philippines. Now, following a week in which the North African campaign has seen only local actions and a regrouping of forces by both sides, Bob Trout reported, rather as he told you just a few moments ago, that there is a resumption of hostilities on a major scale. These reports from North Africa are interesting in the North African campaign, but of course the Far East still holds the center of the stage and will probably for some time. Here in the studio with me is Major George Fielding Elliott, Columbia's military expert, who will analyze now these latest developments in the Far East. Major Elliott.
The Japanese appear to be taking the offensive in an effort to delay and impede American operations in the Far East. Apparently confronted with a situation in which there was no escape except war, the Japanese have attacked the main American naval base in the Pacific at Pearl Harbor on the island of Oahu in the Hawaiian Islands. This attack is by air and can only come from aircraft carriers, since the Japanese do not have any bases close enough to the Hawaiian Islands from which to launch land-based aircraft. This is a very great risk for the Japanese to place aircraft carriers within reach of the very powerful naval patrol bombers and the long-range Army bombers on the island of Oahu. It is a risk which would only be assumed as a very desperate measure, one which may well result in the loss of the carriers that are making the attack, but may also gain for the Japanese important time to carry out operations in the Far East because of the damage that they may inflict on the naval base and shipping in Oahu, and thus delay the proceeding of the United States Pacific Fleet to the Western Pacific. That is probably the Japanese object, and we don't know yet what success they've had in carrying it out. A Japanese air attack is also being made on Army and Navy installations at Manila in the Philippines. Manila and its surrounding area is also of military importance, but is far less formidable in the character of its defenses than is the island of Oahu, and the Japanese consequently have a greater chance of getting away with the forces that they've have sent there to make these attacks. The Japanese have probably 7 aircraft carriers in commission and an unknown number of carriers converted from merchant vessels. There are at least 3 or 4 of these, and perhaps more, with comparatively small numbers of aircraft, but together they make a formidable concentration, and they can operate about 20 aircraft from these converted carriers and anywhere from 30 to 50 aircraft from their larger carriers. These would include both scouting and bombing aircraft as well as fighters to protect the carriers, but in a case like this, a desperate forlorn hope business, they've probably concentrated on bombers and put every bomber on board the carriers that they will handle. They're expecting to take heavy losses, and these losses may be expected. The question is how much delay they have purchased for the carriers that they have risked.
An endeavor which we hope has not been successful, so that they might make their attacks and head off American military and naval operations which might constrict Japanese operations in the Far East.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. We have been on the telephone with our station in KGMB, which is in Honolulu, and they report to us that the attacking planes number between 50 and 100, that the air raid is still on and that the anti-aircraft fire can be heard in a steady drone as the attacking planes come in. As Mr. Davis told you, we received a bulletin just a little while ago which reported that there have been some of these, what Manila Honolulu calls unidentified planes shot down. And this latest report now from KGMB is all that we have to the moment. We will continue to receive reports from there, also from Washington, on the developments in our relations with Japan, the relations which will tell very shortly the story of what is to happen in the months that are to come. And Columbia will bring you important news bulletins during the broadcast of the New York Philharmonic Society, which follows this program, and will also bring you a summary of all developments at the intermission time.
This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
We have just received word here, not fully confirmed yet, that Guam is in trouble. First, the Commercial Pacific Company in Manila found its cable dead. Then word came through that bombers were sighted overhead in Guam at 6:45 a.m. Nothing further has come through in this direction. The next bad news came from Shanghai, which is a practically defenseless city now, with the United States Marines gone and the local defense forces stripped down to a very small amount. The Japanese apparently attacked Shanghai at night, shelling and machine gunning the Bund and occupying the main waterfront. They are reported to have sunk a British gunboat and taken over the American gunboat Wake, which was in a partially decommissioned condition, acting as a communications contact for the American consulate in Shanghai. There should be little trouble in taking over the international settlement if the Japanese have not already done so. They probably have. That means that 2,000 or 3,000 Americans are stranded there, unable to get out. The latest news of what was happening in Shanghai, not in much detail, came to us through a German radio report from Shanghai itself. When word first came to Manila that Honolulu had been attacked and bombed, the world thought it was Manila that had suffered. That was apparently due to an erroneous report. One came through later here from London to the effect that Manila had been bombed. So far, it is not true. But things have been moving very fast since word came about the Honolulu bombing. General Douglas MacArthur, head of the United States Armed Forces in the Far East, was officially informed of the surprise attack on Hawaii in the middle of the night. Well before dawn, the Air Force had planes in the sky. The armed forces of the Far East are on alert and in the welter of action. They are rolling into position at strategic spots. Beaches where landings might be affected are reinforced according to plans laid long ago. General MacArthur's first concern was for panic. He issued a calming statement telling the Filipino populace not to lose their heads and turn into the country, blocking roads and highways which the military needs urgently for its own use. General MacArthur commanded the populace for its poise and self-control during the last few weeks of uncertainty and anxiety here. And in a statement, he said, quote, "Nothing can help our military effort more than a continuation of this calmness and self-restraint. Each individual should continue with fortitude his usual routine and be prepared to carry out with promptitude such directions as the authorities may order. These orders will be for the security and well-being of the people. The military is on the alert, and every possible defense measure is being undertaken. My message is one of serenity and confidence." End quote. Then General MacArthur made another move. With the consent of President Quezon, the Civilian Emergency Administration, which is the Filipino-operated agency for protection of the civilian populace has now been made responsible to the headquarters of General MacArthur. CEA officials are now reporting in, and measures for the civilian defense will be issued very shortly, General MacArthur said. Most of the city of Manila has not realized yet the portent of the news that we are at war. The news broke here too late for the regular editions of the papers. People got up and went about their business as usual. The news finally percolated to the community, and floods of telephone calls came into newspaper offices and government offices, wondering if it was true that the United States was at war with Japan. I have just passed a whole schoolyard of children doing their morning exercises. The town looks fairly normal. Planes are overhead. A large group of them just went by at this moment, headed north from Nichols Field. They are American planes guarding against attack. The Navy is likewise on its toes. Admiral Charles Hart, Commander-in-Chief of the Asiatic Fleet, gave out word that hostilities had opened with an attack on Pearl Harbor in Honolulu. Steps are being taken accordingly, was his laconic comment on that state of affairs. The Pan American Airways Clipper route runs directly across the zone of hostilities. Their line starts at San Francisco, goes to Honolulu, Midway, Wake, Guam, and the Philippines, then on to China or Singapore. The manager of Pan American Airways Manila office says they have a westbound clipper at Wake Island, but none others in the trouble zones, and none at Honolulu. There has been no time to check on what is happening at the clipper bases on Wake and Midway. A reliable source in Manila reports that the Japanese have an air base about 1,000 miles south of Wake in the South Pacific. It would be a long trip to bomb Hawaii from there, but if they sent over big bombers, it could have happened. Manila, of course, wonders when its turn is coming. They noted the phraseology of the Tokyo announcement about a state of war in the Western Pacific. This is more properly the Western Pacific than is the region around Hawaii. Let me repeat, there have been no bombings in Manila yet. We don't know what to expect. Japan has pulled a surprise move in Honolulu, but the Philippines is also at war. Planes from the Air Command are scouting continuously over the coastlines and over central Luzon to intercept any possible attack from any direction that Japan might undertake. We have just received word, not fully confirmed, that Guam is in trouble. The cable company here found its line cut, and then word came along that bombers were sighted overhead at 6:45 a.m. Nothing further has come through. The next word came from Shanghai, which is practically defenseless now with the Marines gone. The United States Marines landed in Manila last week. The Japanese attacked the place apparently at night, shelling and machine gunning the famous Bund, Shanghai's waterfront. They are afraid to have sunk a British gunboat and taken over the American gunboat Wake, which was the only armed United States vessel in the vicinity. This boat was in a partially decommissioned condition, acting as a communications contact for the American consulate in Shanghai. This is Ford Wilkins in Manila, returning you now to CBS in New York.
From Washington, the recruiting office of the United States Navy announces that all recruiting centers will be open at 8 a.m. tomorrow. You've been listening to Elmer Davis, Albert Warner, Bob Trout from London, and Major George Fielding Elliott with a review and analysis of the Far Eastern situation. The Wrigley Company has told us that we may interrupt their program at any time to bring you the latest bulletins. Our next special news broadcast is scheduled at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when we shall hear from John Daly in New York, Edward R. Murrow from Washington, and William L. Shirer. But now, we return you to our regularly scheduled program.
As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense. But always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.